There are images that once seen cannot be unseen. The napalm girl in the picture from 1971 ranks high on that list for me. She's a little child running naked, arms outstretched, crying through her village in Vietnam after a US pilot was ordered to drop napalm on civilians leaving their temple of worship. There are images. Once seen cannot be unseen. Just ask John Plummer, who recalls first seeing that photo on the cover of Stars and Stripes just days after it was taken. He was a low-level staff officer stationed in Vietnam, and though he neither ordered the attack or flew the plane that dropped the bomb, he was wrecked with guilt and filled with shame. And he returned like so many soldiers do, broken, an alcoholic, struggling with the horrors of war. The first time that Kim Phuc saw that photograph was 14 months after it was taken. She had just returned home after enduring 17 life-saving surgeries. She'd been taken to the hospital in Saigon 14 months before by Nick Ut, the 21-year-old photographer who would eventually receive the Pulitzer for that picture. Though trained not to get involved, he couldn't bear the suffering that he saw that day. And while Kim loves Nick, whom to this day she calls Uncle Nick, she hated that photo that he took of her. It wasn't until she held her own newborn in her arms that she understood the power that a photo had to protect other children from suffering. At first, all she knew was that napalm and that photo had stolen her childhood anonymity. She was taken out of school and toured around and used as a propaganda tool for the Vietnamese government. I was filled up with hatred, Kim said. The napalm did not kill me, but the hatred, the people abusing me, that almost killed me. And in 1982, at the age of 19, she read the New Testament and she began a conversion journey towards Christianity and forgiveness. It wasn't easy or overnight, she says, but God was patient. In 1992, while their plane was refueling in Newfoundland, she and her husband walked off the tarmac and sought asylum here in Canada, where they have been living ever since. For many, many years, Kim avoided publicity until 1996, when she agreed to speak at the Veterans Day ceremonies at the Memorial Wall in Washington, D.C., where the soldiers from the Vietnam War are honored. And she stood before a crowd of soldiers who had devastated her home country. And she offered forgiveness. She said that day that if she ever met the pilot who dropped that bomb, she would tell them that she forgave him. John Plummer, the soldier whose life had been destroyed by guilt, was in the crowd that day. And he passed a note to her that said, "I am that man." And a few moments later, he was sobbing in her arms while she repeated the words, "I forgive you. I forgive you." I believe in God's plan, says Kim. I know my purpose, to understand the trials and the challenges that are always there, but to continue to have hope. I have lived with so much hatred. Now I value so much the lesson I learned on how to forgive. I forgive myself. I love the people that caused my suffering. So from that point of view, I really want to recognize that this picture of me is a powerful thing to work with me for peace. And I do not hate it anymore. We all want to be free from the pain of our hurts and our hatred. And perhaps that is why Jesus is so emphatic in his teachings about forgiveness. 7 times, is that enough? No, 77 times. Practice forgiveness until your heart is cleansed. And he tells the story about a king who forgives a debt so large that the servant could never pay it back, ever in his lifetime. And he uses the poetics of the impossible and hyperbole to spin a parable about a man who cannot forgive and is tortured as a result. For when we refuse to practice forgiveness, it is not God who throws us into the dungeon, but us who let our minds ruminate on old hurts, who twist up our guts with thoughts of revenge and torture ourselves more than any prison guard ever could. But how? How do we begin the practice of forgiveness that Jesus and Kim Fhuc speak of? C.S. Lewis once wrote that everybody thinks forgiveness is a good idea until they have something serious to forgive. Mahatma Gandhi said, "The weak can never forgive. Forgiveness is the attribute of the strong." And scientific studies show that forgiveness is really hard work for us. Resentment, oh, that's easy. In fact, when we think thoughts of revenge, the same pleasure points in our brain light up as when we have a craving for chocolate. To lash out at the ones who hurt us, to punish someone for the pain that they caused us, makes us feel, at least initially, good. At my local pharmacy, they keep the forgiveness cards in the occasional section of the card rack, tucked in amongst the get well and the bon voyage. These sentiments that are to be expressed only once in a while. But Jesus says forgiveness is not an occasional act. It's an everyday practice. Because if we don't learn to forgive, if we lock that person who hurt us deep inside the dungeons of our hearts, something awful will happen to us as well. That same scientist who tells us that revenge makes us initially feel good tells us that holding on to anger and hurt is correlated to an increase in cancer, heart attacks, high blood pressure, and other illnesses. Resentment may literally be death-dealing. And while those who practice forgiveness discover that it boosts their self-esteem, lowers their blood pressure, and helps them sleep better, it is also linked to a decrease in anxiety, depression, and pain when talking about hurtful incidences from the past. I still have many scars on my body and severe pain most days, says Kim. But my heart is cleansed. Forgiveness, though, to be clear, is not the same as condoning or forgetting a wrong. It doesn't mean that the one you forgave is off the legal hook or let back into your life where they might cause more pain. Forgiveness, says psychologist Paul Coleman, is the only means, given our humanness and our imperfections, to overcome the hate and the condemnation, to proceed with the business of growing and loving. If that little girl in the photo can forgive, says Kim, everyone can. And over the years, many of you have stopped me in the halls to tell me how important it is to you that what happens on Sunday morning reverberates through the rest of your week. Don't tell us a story, you say, about something that happened 2,000 years ago. Tell us what that story means for our life today. This morning, we read about the Egyptians who would not offer mercy and freedom to the Israelites, and so they suffered for their cruelty. We learned of Peter, who wants to know how many times he should forgive that neighbor who's been a jerk. We heard Jesus' parable about the merciful king, the unforgiving servant. We learned about a real-life example of forgiveness, a woman etched with scars of hate and filled with the power of love. So now I turn to this week's invitation. I invite you, when you are in your prayer time, when you are going for a walk or a drive, or taking a moment to yourself, to bring to mind a time where you received mercy after not behaving your best, a time when you got a life-affirming gift when punishment was due, a time you were forgiven. Open up the annals of your own personal history and remember. Maybe even write down a word or two about that time when you were forgiven. Perhaps you've heard the story about the kindly Scottish doctor who died. And after his death, the wife looked through the accounts ledger and she discovered that a number of the lines had been crossed off and with a note that said, "Forgiven, too poor to pay." Now, the physician's wife decided that these people should pay their debt in full, and so she proceeded to sue for the money. And when the case came before the judge had only one question. "Is this your husband's handwriting?" And when she replied that it was, he responded, "There is no court in the land that can obtain a debt once the word forgiven has been written." Forgiven, too poor to pay. It's a great analogy for our life with God. We could never make up the hurts we've caused this world, but we are forgiven by God anyway. And so we can extend mercy because we've been shown mercy. Here, right in this gathering, are many stories of forgiveness, of times when someone was kind, merciful, forgiving to us. And then there is our other shared story of Christ, who came to teach love, and when we tortured and hung him on the cross to die, with his last breath, he said, "Forgive them. They know not what they do." So this week, while you are thinking about the times that you have been forgiven, I invite you to bring to mind the name or names of someone you have yet to forgive. And perhaps, beginning with the prayer, "God, help me to forgive," take a step towards the cleansing of your own heart. You can take that first step now as you sit in prayer, listening to Adrian play for us. May God's healing touch find you as you practice forgiveness this week. Amen.